Hi everyone, welcome to our fantastic event today, in which we have Angelica, who is uh, a film director, but also someone who is part of Sussex. She's an ESRC postdoctoral fellow here. She is a visual anthropologist and a documentary filmmaker whose practice and research focus is on the exploration of intimate sense-making processes through the use of collaborative visual methods. She has conducted research with people living with HIV in Chile, with queer communities in the UK, and with refugee women in Bangladesh. So, and also in Jordan and the UK. So yes, so you'll have to maybe speak a little bit to that at some point. Angelica actually received a PhD in anthropology, media, and performance from the University of Manchester. And prior to this, she completed an MPhil in ethnographic documentary at the same university. She studied social communication at the Pontifical Catholic University in Chile and documentary filmmaking at the International School of Cinema, San Antonio de los Baños, Cuba. And she's worked for universities in the UK and Chile and for international organizations such as UN Women and UN AIDS. Angelica's research has been presented at various international conferences, and actually I remember us being at the same conference in January called Mobilizing Methods in Medical Anthropology, where Angelica was on a panel on storytelling. Yeah. And this is what we're going to see today, is how thinking about storytelling through visual means. And I think that that's going to be so exciting. So welcome to everyone. We have an audience in the lecture theatre here. So welcome to you and welcome to our online audience. It's lovely to see you. And we are going to, over the next couple of minutes, I'm going to hand over to Angelica briefly to introduce the film. Then we shall watch the film, which is about 58 minutes. And then I'll just ask Angelica some questions and be in conversation about the making of the film. And then we will hand over to you for your questions. So over to you, Angelica. Tell us a little bit about, the film, what we're going to see today.
Thank you very much, Maya. And thank you very much to everyone who is here now and the online audience as well. I'm not going to say too much about the film. The only thing that I want to share with you, just as a preliminary information, is that this project is a project that I'm still working on and explores basically how people make sense of their experiences with HIV in context in which it's difficult to talk about it. And most importantly, what happens when they challenge the context that makes difficult for them to talk about their experiences. So basically, from an anthropological point of view, is how through our engagement, we can co-create an ethnographic context in which their narratives emerge, and what sort of media we can use other than words, and how can we use that to hopefully promote some change. So this is a very active form of working from anthropology. And the name of the film, This Is My Face, comes from, you will see on the film, but it also comes from a writer who is from Chile, and they were writing a lot about challenging stigma. And of one of their verses, it says, "This is my face, this is who I am." So I'm more than HIV, I'm way more than HIV, but I have no shame in telling that this is who I am, and HIV is part of that.
Yeah. Great, thank you. So,
So what we're going to do is that we are going to share with the online audience a link to watch the film, so you can click on it and watch it from YouTube because we think the streaming quality will be better than if we share the screen with you through Zoom. So we will do this now, and you can click on it and start to watch the film.
So I'm just picking up all these things that were said that are so rich in the film. The other thing was living with exposure. Again, really sort of your life is exposed, everything's exposed and you are on show, as it were, you see. And again, I wasn't sure, but in some context of HIV, some what I've read is that often, the prophylaxis, the medication that you take then begins to have effects on your body, and you become misshapen in certain ways. And again, I was wondering whether, living with exposure, how even without that, you seem so sort of, bare and sort of exposed. So, I mean, it's just so rich. And how one of your protagonists says in the exhibition that it's the traces of life that I have made here for people to see. And then this process gives me back hope. So again, how participation in this is kind of, like you say, co-creating, but it's giving that co-creating meaning. So, I mean, I have, and then finally, what one of your protagonists says, I've become friends with the illness. It's important to become friends with the illness, to confront it. So these were just some of the things that I think was so wonderfully captured in your film. So I'm going to stop talking. I'm just responding, very sort of gut reaction. But and my only sort of really to start you off talking about the film was how did you actually, how long did all this take? The question of time. There's so much about time, like giving people time, so how long did all this take? And that'll be my only question, and then over to people, audience, and whoever wants to talk.
Yeah. No, thank you very much for your wonderful comments. Yeah, I think what you were saying about this idea of participation, like meaningful participation, is something that we really work hard to co-create for us, something that was meaningful for all the people involved in the process. And with regards to your question about time, which is always like a pressing question, in particular when, as researchers, we have specific time frames in which we are supposed to deliver, and that doesn't really respond to the nature of human interaction.
Yeah.
It doesn't, you can set up a timer and on your religion, but the film captures my PhD work. So this was part of my PhD thesis. So I had a really long field work. It was 14 months of field work. And before that, so I'm originally from Chile. The film was made in Chile, and the research was done in Chile. So I already had some contacts, so I wasn't starting from scratch. This is what I'm trying to say. So there was an ongoing relationship happening already. But I didn't, before I started the research, even though I was already involved with some organizations that support people living with HIV, I didn't know what I was going to do with my research, so I didn't know what I was going to offer. I didn't know how I was going to conduct research, really. So everything happened during fieldwork, but there was a past. And then what was really interesting was that in Chile it's really difficult to live with HIV because there was a long dictatorship, because there is a lot of homophobia, and there is a lot of machismo, and there is a historical lack of sexual education. So it's really like the perfect and the worst storm for stigma. And so I, at the beginning, I thought, okay, this conversation is going to be about how people live with HIV and how they deal with the stigma, and then hopefully someone will be interested in taking part in the research. But then after time was passing, I realized that actually there were some people who were saying, okay, I'm okay with being involved. But consent in that particular project was way more complicated than saying yes. So it happened that I had to, a few times, more than a couple of times, a few times I had to tell people, okay, if you want to be involved, great, but let's talk about it in a month. Can you talk with your family first? Can you tell your partner? So there was a lot going on in terms of kind of like work before and establishing a relationship before even starting to think about the images. So the film captures actually the last 3 months of fieldwork. But there was all this process before that, in which I also had an idea when I went back to Chile to conduct fieldwork. I had an idea of what I wanted to do, but then I realized that I had to leave that open to be reshaped, and we kind of like reshaped many aspects of the method and the idea of what we wanted to do, and then if we were going to do an exhibition or not, what was going to happen with the film, who was going to be the audience for the film, and all that. So that project is still going on. So now the kind of like the next step is to be able to work with women and non-binary people, and the reason why we work with men for this project was because that was the first time that people were going to be open about living with HIV in Chile. So there were a lot of concerns about how can we take care of the participants involved. And women find themselves in Chile in a more vulnerable situation. And the good thing is that politically the context in Chile has changed a little bit, so it's a little bit easier. So this is what I'm working on now. Yeah.
Thank you. That was, wonderful. And, also talking about, I did notice the gender kind of aspect. Yeah. So you covered that as well. But open to the audience, really. If you have any questions, or any sort of reactions and comments.
Haley said something on the chat.
Okay. So, yeah. Do you want to read it out? Yeah.
Yeah, I can read out what Haley said.
Thank you, Haley, for your comment and question.
So she said, thank you so much, Angélica. The film is such a moving account of living with HIV, and I love the way the photography and narrative intent is so explicitly woven into what we see. It is great to see the film after hearing your RAI presentation. I now get a strong feeling for the sense-making orientation. I have been reflecting recently on the inequalities inherent in discourses of living with diseases that are often obscured in policy pronouncements. I would have liked to ask you further about how these inequalities might manifest in Chile.
Yeah, thank you, Haley. Good to see you again. So in particular, with regards to, I can tell you a little bit about the kind of like social, biomedical, and pharmacological inequalities in Chile when you live with HIV. The majority of people who live with HIV in Chile have access to treatment because since 2013 is guaranteed by the state. But that doesn't mean that everyone has access to treatment. Many people, because of, probably better than me, but many people, because of many different factors, don't even make it to the clinics or to the hospitals where they can get treatment, and still many people don't want to get tested because they don't want to have to deal with the reality of having a positive diagnosis. And that really resonates with the, say, a lack of understanding of what it means to live with an illness in Chile. Is pretty much focused on the physical element of what happens to your body, and there are no resources to help you to understand from a psychosocial perspective how to deal with that. And that really doesn't means that there is no recognition actually of what involves to live with HIV, but more broadly what it means to live with an illness. And that is something that was really, really important as part of the participants' contribution, how they portray. I mean, we talk quite a lot about their encounters with the healthcare system and the providers, and how they were being treated as patients, so only as patients, and who were there to get medication, and that only, as if HIV or any other illness, for that matter, only affected the body. Yeah, so that is just to mention one a very clear example of how it's difficult for people to access, but not only that, how that also corresponds to a lack of understanding of what it means to live with HIV in that context. Yeah. I don't know if I responded to what you wanted to ask.
Should we take from this audience here? Yes, please.
I think one of the most striking and touching scenes for me was where the mother and the son were sitting on the bench, and she was he was kind of like wanting the affection from her, and she was saying to him, like, I show it in other ways, and that kind of really hit me, because when I've gone through trauma or things in the past, I've almost felt neglected or blamed my parents for it, without almost realizing their kind of generational trauma, and obviously to a lesser extent because of what's going on in Chile. But then when I kind of now reflecting on what they've been through and how they've almost over the years learned how to kind of show that affection in ways that have helped me, and it's just, I think that this has really touched me a lot, and I thank you for showing it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And this is what you're referring to. I will share that with the collaborators, with the protagonists of the film, because some of the things that we discussed, part of the conversation that we had about who was the audience for the film, was that they made really clear that they didn't want to be seen as different, even though the film would recognize and identify the particularities of their narratives. One of the ideas was that these narratives are, to some extent, very similar to the ones that everyone else has. So that kind of like challenging and dealing with trauma, dealing with difficult life journeys, and how you try to make sense of that. That was really important for, as part of the kind of like the background of the project, to make of these stories that recognize the particularities, but stories that are universal to some extent. Yeah, thank you.
There's been a message on the chat, Elizabeth Challen has kind of expanded on that a bit, saying the son whose mother finally hugged him and the father who was finally able to kiss his daughter were very moving moments, which makes me wonder if relatives of those with HIV also get involved in activism to assure others who have relatives living with HIV. Also, the film sheds light on how some of the issues people with HIV face are also common to other people. It just happens to be HIV.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Yeah, their families, well, some of the families get involved in activism, but it's usually the mothers, and you can see that from the film. The relevance of their moms is really incredible, and in contrast to that, the lack or the invisibility of their dad. That is also something that is you can see really easily, and this is also connected to if you're a little bit into Latin American history, something that you can see in different fields of Latin American history. So who is looking for the disappeared are the women, usually their moms. And in this case, that's the only dad who appear, the only father who appears is Oscar, who is the person living with HIV.
Yes, I think that's a really interesting kind of point about the in a way, and just pushing that a little further. Do you think it's not because dads don't want to participate, but the way in which either they're brought up, or that it is also to deal with emotions, and they don't know how to they don't have the skills to show that emotion, or participate in that kind of activism, or help in this whole process of constructing a more positive identity. So so do you think that, and therefore I think more broadly in terms of activism, it does need a much more it needs to have all these people involved in a way, and so what is the kind of activism now in Chile around these issues, do you think?
Well, the first, with regards to the fathers, I totally agree with you, and there is a historical lack of emotional education, and if we think about, for example, what I mentioned about machismo and homophobia, what is underpinning these two ideas is a misunderstood conception of what it means to be a man. So these weird ways in which people are, usually men are educated to perform in a hegemonic masculine way, and how that completely cuts off their emotional side. So they don't know how to, not all of them, of course, but many of them, they don't know how to deal with that, and that can be seen as part of the.
But neither do the mothers in a way, because you can see with the mother on the bench, she doesn't actually know how to. She doesn't know to deal with things emotionally either. So it is quite it is quite interesting. We have another question. Chi.
I'm so struck by the inadequacy of the medical system to be able to respond, especially to the psychosocial aspects of this lifelong condition. And I wondered whether you had, and I'm still very moved, I can hardly speak, it's just exceptional. I wondered, had you anticipated the sort of healing aspect of for the participants of partaking in this process, because many of them spoke in the film about the transformation that they experienced in being visible. And I suppose as you take the work forward to look at other groups like women and people of indeterminate gender identity, how one might anticipate either just that process really I see that you went into such great depth in the consenting process, and also the relationship that you developed with the whole process of their participation, which has brought so much depth. So really, it's to that, just asking you more about that aspect of the healing that can come in that process of the healing of the stigma, and also that they have all spoken themselves of their intent to bring healing to other, or to bring hope and support to the health of others through their journey.
Yeah, now that's a good question, because I mean, as a researcher, and therefore as a person who intervenes the world, because every time we go out, we are intervening the world. I go to the field with the idea that people are their best theorists. So you just have to open a space. That idea of, for example, some people use the idea of giving voice. I hate that. People have their own voice. The only thing that we can do is that we are in a position of privilege, and there are a few things that we know, and we can offer that. And by offering that, that means also allowing space for people to not only participate, but to take the lead in certain elements of their work, the work that you're producing together. And therefore that can go, and that means also responsibility. And that can go in many different directions. So I didn't have any idea that it was going to lead to a process of, making sense, but also maybe healing. And that's on them. I mean, we work on producing something together. It could go in so many different directions, but this is not something that the research did for them. The research was just an excuse to create something, if that makes sense. So I didn't know what's going to happen, but and that also, is a process that could, probably the word healing can really work, but it's not only for them, it's also for me, and it's also for other people who may come across, the film, or now we're working on a website and may kind of like click on the website and see some of the images and say, okay, actually I can do that, maybe something like that. Or the people who have been to the exhibitions. But that is out of my control. There's some.
Well, actually, sort of coming back to that question of doctors, I thought it was very interesting because, there is this intimate and yet distant relation with the doctors. And it is one of power and authority, but also then, and I think this is probably Oscar or one of them said that, thinking about the doctors, that they have this power over us, and yet they are so vulnerable because I'm living longer than him, that the doctor who gave me the diagnosis has actually passed away. So it was a real moment of, feeling that kind of overturning of power relationships. And actually, and also the vulnerability when the doctors are saying, well, actually, you sit there or stay away or keep your mask on, or, I found this a lot when I worked in India with observing relations between sort of doctors and people from lower castes or whatever, that, they make them sit apart, and it's all kind of in that just small gesture that you have reduced the person to absolutely nothing, in terms of their identity.
Yeah. But I think there are some similarities in the kind of like, in Latin America, and probably as well in India, from what I know, the idea of hierarchies is taken to another extreme, and then it comes, class system, but then also the colonial history as well, and how that becomes, part of a colonial mind. So we grew up there, and we kind of like integrate that into the way in which we negotiate with others, and there is always a hierarchy, and that is a continuation of that.
Yeah, but HIV goes across those hierarchies, and that's what the film is showing. That it goes across class, it goes across, it affects everyone. It affects the doctor,
Exactly.
it affects, the patient. So, is there another question there? I think I just saw something coming in.
Amelia's asked whether you can remember what you were talking about at the beginning when the audio went a bit funny.
Beginning of the questions or the beginning of the...
At the beginning of the discussion. If you could...
You mentioned about the title, and you said it was going to become...
Yes.
Is that maybe something that they may have missed?
Yes, they missed the first bit of what you were saying. So maybe about the title they wanted to know what you were saying.
Yeah, the title. So there is one Claudio in one of the scenes. He's going into this museum, as a kind of like new artist, because he was studying arts at that time. He wanted to go there and see these images that were part of this exhibition from a kind of like a really famous visual artist and also poet. And the artist who is presenting their work at the gallery, they wrote this text that I was mentioning at the beginning, that is about not being ashamed of being who you are, and how HIV is part of their life history, but it's not everything. So they're way more than that. And there is this phrase on one of their texts that is about the literal translation is not "this is my face," but it's something like that. It means that. So we decided to take that as our motto, but also as the title of the film. Yeah.
Great. Anyone else from the audience here would have a comment or no? Yes, please.
Did you ever speak to the parents about their generational trauma or about the history of Chile, or did you kind of leave that out because that wasn't the topic of the ethnography? Because they were just sort of kind of there.
Yeah, well. No. That is a great question. I just have so many things going on in my mind. So the dictatorship ended in 1989.
Yeah.
But even if you didn't live at that age, during that time, that trauma goes, through generations and passed through generations. The good thing about it is that now in 2019, there was big movement in Chile, and things went a bit chaotic for a couple of years, and now we have a new president, and this president represents all these new ideas that we were kind of like trying to really push. So it's great that things have changed, but I'm not sure if there is if that trauma stops in one generation. So this idea that we were talking about before, this idea of silence as a strategy to survive, is part of the HIV experience. I didn't have time within the film to explore all that, because that's opening a Pandora box, that either you really address it or you don't really engage with that. But I don't think, maybe, for the people who are going to be born now, that a new Chile is starting to flourish, maybe that trauma will be less, but for those of us, I was born under dictatorship, and I remember many, many things. Yeah.
So Angélica, are you going to be also producing a book out of this? I mean, out of your thesis?
Yeah.
And so, what's the relationship between the book and the film then, or how will you sort of, combine the two to give, not to give voice, but to facilitate, the voice that's already there?
So the project is like multimodal project. So the book, the film, the exhibitions, the website, all are different entry points for different audiences. So each format brings something particular to the conversation about HIV. For the book, there will be a collaboration in writing, but I'm not, because of the time frames, I'm not anticipating that it will be as long as the previous part of the project. So the book will be more focused on academic audiences, but still open to the general public. Whereas, for example, the website will be completely from the perspective of the participants. So what we're doing is that we're kind of like creating this as a platform in which people can just like go there, share whatever they want, a photo, a drawing, a poem, a voice recording, and that can stay there even if you don't want to reveal who you are.
And it's an ongoing.
It is open, yeah, and it's beyond, this
the project, beyond the before and after this particular time frame of the project. So that's fascinating. Creating all these different kind of fora through which this knowledge is, for whom it's created, the different audiences and how it's created. I think that's absolutely fascinating. I think we've really learned a lot, from your film and through talking to you. And unless there are any final questions, is there anyone in the chat? Eve, are you monitoring that? No.
Yeah, we're all good on the chat.
We're all good on the chat. So I just wish you all the best and come back and talk to us again about how this has moved on in terms of the other things that are happening.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you very much.